Alright, we're going to continue with modeling some assets for our character. I'm going to start with doing the belt and the cloth and things like that. So we have a few different ways we can approach this. Let me just take my Turbo Smooth off here. So I'm just going to isolate these two. So for the belt, what I can do is I can kind of get a nice shape on my character and then use that to make a belt. So I'm going to take some of these lines here. I'm going to just make them kind of follow the contours of where I would want my belt to be. I'm going to push these guys up a little and then give myself another edge to work with. I'm going to hit connect and connect those guys and then just readjust my shapes here, my line flow. Alright, let's take a look at it from the back. What do we got here? Alright, so we have more or less where we want our belt to be. So I'm just going to select that edge. I'm going to hit ring, and I'm going to hold Control and click my polygons, and it's going to select the polygons here. You notice we have a nice, decent belt-like shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the detach button. I'm going to have detach as clone checked on, that way it won't actually delete the polygons from my body model. I hit OK, and then I'm going to have these guys as a separate mesh. So I'm going to throw a symmetry on there, so it'll be fully like that. I'm going to just collapse this. I don't need my. I'm not going to be working on one end at a time. I'm going to go through. I'm going to select all my polygons, and I'm going to go to extrude, and then hit the little box beside it called settings. And that's going to bring up this little dialog here, and it's going to look terrible at first. So first I'm going to do is with this little drop box here, I'm going to select local normal. So by default, extrude just extrudes upwards, right? And local normal will extrude kind of per polygon in its direction, so kind of like that. So now that has like a nice little tutu. We just lower that in there, just get a little bit of depth, right? However we want our belt to be. And then I'll hit OK on that. So at least now we have a decent, kind of belt. So I can go through and just slap on like a brown material on there, just for good measure. And the nice thing about doing it this way is all of our edges line up to the body. So you see these are all the same. So when we turbo smooth both of these, there's going to be no weird cuts. It's all going to be seamlessly attached to the body, right? All our polygon and edge flow is going to be nice and smooth and accurate. So that's probably the most important thing when you're building models on top of your model, is to make sure that all your edges flow over nicely. Alright, so we have our general belt, and what we're going to need is a belt buckle, and we're going to want this strap. So let's take a look at belt. I always like to take a look at photo reference. So let's look at a buckled belt kind of thing. Doesn't have to be on a person, but let's just kind of take a look at how they function. So let's say we have this belt here. It's not exactly what we want, but I always recommend really understanding the things you're making. It's easy just to throw some shapes together and get a general look of what you want, but the better you can model things to actually look like they work and they function, the better off you'll be. The more realistic things will look, the better they'll sit and fit and all that kind of stuff. So let's model this exact belt buckle, for instance. So the first thing we're going to need is our belt is one continuous, or it's one strip that doesn't attach like ours does right now. It overlaps and then goes off to the side. So we're going to need something like this. We're going to need to break it and have the belt go over to the side. So let's take a look how we can do that. I'm going to take these faces right here and marquee select them. I'm just going to delete them. So we're going to have our kind of belt buckle attachment start right here. And if I want to cap these off, I can. I could just select these two edges and hit bridge, and that'll connect those. And then with these ones, I can double click this edge, and what I can start doing is I can, with holding shift, when I move, it's going to extrude those edges out. So I can start extruding them out over top of this guy. Right? And one thing you might notice is, see how these edges are angled inwards toward the body, but these ones are straight because we extruded them from that. You're going to want to rotate these in and have them follow that general contour too. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start shrinking this belt because, like our photo reference, right, it gets smaller. You know, they get smaller as they get to the end. Sometimes they get smaller right at the end. Sometimes they have a longer taper. So it kind of depends what you want to do. I might actually do a bit of a smaller taper, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust these just so they kind of look like they're the same size, because our belt is not exactly the same size here, which is okay. So I'm going to extrude that again over here. Right, angle it in towards my body, and then maybe this is where I will shrink it. So let's say that's going to be our belt. Actually, maybe that's a little short. Let's say we're going to have a buckle here to kind of hold it together. So this is actually going to come out a little. Let's do something like that. I think this will be more fun. It'll look a little more natural and interesting than just having it straight up against the body. Maybe out a little bit like that. And the same thing, I'm going to just bridge those two edges together and cap that off. So that looks a little funky. We might want to go through and adjust that a little. Actually, I want that to stay up there, so it's probably more on this end here that it's looking funny. There you go, something like that. Alright, so we have our belt. Let's do our belt buckle next. Let's make sure this is all, how we want it. So let's take a look at our photo ref here, and the first thing we have is this thing attaching to the backside, holding on to our belt. So let's model something like that. So we have this guy here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a ring, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, I'm going to ring that to, I'm going to select all these polygons, including the edge. So I'll have all that. And he's kind of on a weird angle right now, just because our body kind of did that. So I might adjust that a little bit so it's a little bit straighter. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing I did for the whole belt. I'm going to extrude it just a little bit. There we go. And that'll be our little buckle kind of thing. Right, we could always move that in a little if we want to. Alright, so this probably added a whole bunch of faces in the back here that we don't want for now. These ones here. So I'm going to go through and just delete those, clean them up. Now the other thing you might want to do is just apply a different color to that, just so you know that's your metal. I like to apply colors to my things just to kind of help me understand what I'm working on. So if we take a look at that, it has a round edge to it as well. That's where the buckle actually connects. So I might do something like that as well. Just going to extrude this a little bit. Right, you notice we're getting some intersections, so we might want to start pushing some of this stuff out. It'll make a lot more sense once we start adding some extra assets in there. So I'm going to connect these with the dialog open. I'm going to make 2 of them. And I'm going to, I would like to scale it, but it's on a weird angle, so I can't really do that. So I'm going to just do something like this. I'm going to take these, carefully make sure I have the correct thing selected. I'm just going to do something like that. Just a little bit of a round shape, just to kind of get what we're after. There we go, and now we're going to model that whole thing over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just make a cylinder. Let's go my top view here. Now I don't need all those height segments, and I don't need it to be as round as it is, because it is going to get mesh smooth and all that. So alright, there we go. Convert that to an editable poly and just kind of align it to my belt. Maybe a little higher on both sides, or sticking out a little bit more. I'm going to just apply that material on there. Next we're going to make the actual buckle, so let's take a look at how that's made. Oh, wrong button. So it's 2 pieces on the top and the bottom and a little edge connecting it. So we got 2 pieces like that, and then one connecting it in the middle. So I'm just going to, let's convert that to an editable poly. Move that over here and just connect those like that. Now in here you notice that this guy is longer, and he's I'm not going to worry about his roundness right now, but he's you can see he's smaller than the outside parts. So let's make sure that we do that. So let's get him a little wide, and let's just shrink him down on let's just throw gray material in here, help us see a little. There we go. So I'm going to delete the top and the bottom face of these because they're just sunk in. We're not going to need them. And I'm going to attach the top and bottom of that. I'm going to add a couple edges in here just so we could get some roundness. I'm going to add one, maybe 2 across here, just in case we want to round it up a little bit. So let's move that up to the top. And we're going to have to adjust for scale and general size and stuff like that. So I want this guy to be fairly big. Let's move that over here. Alright, so let's take a look at, so he is supposed to be bigger than these guys, so let's do that. And something like that. And now I'm going to just stretch him out a little bit. I'm not going to use a scale because I don't want to fully deform him, but just something like this. And just generally even these guys out. So I'm going to select my local rotate. I'm just going to rotate this guy into into place. So he's kind of over top of these. Right, and then I'm going to just rotate him over top of the belt, like that. There we go. He's a little wide, so I might shrink him down a little, like that. And then I'll probably just adjust that cylinder there. Okay, so our dude here is a little boring. We could, you know, change him up. I might use my bend modifier here, and you know, maybe bend him a little bit. Let's just put a 90 in there. All right, let's bend him up a little, and we can rotate him back in. There we go. That looks a little bit more interesting. We could even do that here. There we go. Just a little something something, just to change that up a little. And last but not least, we're going to add the center pin here, coming from this guy through to there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this guy here, just move him down to the center, maybe scale him up a little. And then I will adjust him as needed. All right, let's take a look. Alright, there we go. And we have a belt buckle. So it probably would have been easier for me to actually make this whole contraption straight on the view and then rotate it into place later, but you know, you can make it a whole bunch of different ways. Now, I'm not going to worry about adding the holes into these right now because that would be a nightmare, trying to cut this in and quad everything back up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just leave that for Mudbox, and we'll be able to do it there quite easily. So there we go. We have our belt. And our next step is going to be to make either this cloth or maybe the strap over here, and we'll take a look at some different tools we have to make that happen. So let's take a look at one of my favorite tools that we have here. I'm just going to isolate this dude here. If you'll have your graphite modeling tools open here, you can expand them a little. If you go to Freeform, what we're going to do is we're going to just make a little box here. It's just going to be our little reference, and I'm going to collapse them to an editable poly, and we're going to get all these dialogues up here. What we're going to be using is we're going to be using strips to model, and what we're going to be using is we're going to model on top of this character here, which is going to be pretty awesome. So let's go back here. So without any of these selected, there's a little section here with the word called grid. If you click on the arrow beside grid, you do draw on surface. We're going to select that, and there's going to be a little button below here called pick. I'm just going to pick my goblin model. It's going to say Box01 because I named him poorly. Right? If we name him Goblin, and then we go to draw on surface, pick, and it'll say Goblin there. So when you select something like strips, what will happen now is when we draw, it'll draw on top of this model. will do its best to try and, you know, conform to the shapes of that while keeping these nice strips of quads, which is really handy for drawing things like straps across them, or even that belt if we wanted to do it that way. And what you could do is you can increase this max distance, which will make them wider or smaller. All right. So, you know, let's say we wanted to do the strap going across from his armor. We could just do something like that. Now it's going to stop at some point. Now if you click again, you'll just start drawing a new one, but if you hold shift, it'll continue on from where you left off. And if it's not nice, you can just start over. Right. There we go. It's kind of like a brush stroke in Photoshop. Sometimes it takes a few to get a really nice one. And then from there you can go through and adjust as needed. Alright, so it's looking okay. And I can just select all those faces, hit extrude, do my local normal again, and just extrude it a little bit. Now, the problem with doing things this way, you might be noticing, is that you start getting really weird, you know, kind of cut-throughs like this, where obviously our you know, strap doesn't conform to the edge flow of our model, which can become a problem. So a lot of times I'll just go through and just fix that manually. So I might, you know, move over these guys here, right? That way it's kind of flowing on the side. It doesn't have to be, you know, perfect, but as long as it's generally where some of those edges are, it'll help quite a bit. So. And then we'll just make sure that that looks good in, you know, our turbo smooth and mesh smooths later on. Right, something like that. And we're going to want this guy to kind of follow those angles. Right, all depends on how tightly to the body you want this to be too. You can have parts that are, you know, if this is like a leather strap, it might have a little bit of give here and there. It can conform only so much. It's not, you know, silk or anything like that. It's good to understand what materials you're building your things from, so you can kind of understand how they'll react and conform. Alright, there we go. We got a nice little strap for our armor. Alright, we'll do the same belt buckle thing here too. Right, like we did in for our belt, we could use the same buckle. I could just take that, clean it up, and then throw it up over here. Alright, kind of figure out how I want my straps to go here. These are a little bit different. They're more like backpack straps or something like that. So I'll figure that out. So let's build that armor piece next, and then we'll. I know the cloth is underneath, but we'll worry about that in a little bit. So with cloth, sorry, not cloth. With armor pieces like this, the best way I really like to try and imagine is what these things look like if they were flattened out, they weren't over the shoulder. Before I start, you know, modeling them in. There's a few different ways you can do this. We can just trace the front and get the shape, and then just symmetry it over in the back. So let's try a couple different techniques we can use. I'm going to just draw this piece of armor from the top as if it was flattened out. So I'm going to use my splines here. I'm going to go to line. I'm just going to go to my top viewport, and I'm going to draw, you know, let's say it looks something, let's say like that's half of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extrude this using the extrude modifier just to give myself a little bit depth like that. Or actually, no, you know what? Let's just start simple. Let's just start with, I'm just going to collapse it to a poly. I'm going to use my symmetry modifier to symmetry it this way. Collapse that down. Going to turn these things into quads as well. So actually I might keep my symmetry on there because I don't want to have to redo that for both sides. So I'm going to go to my edge. I'm going to go to insert vertex and just try and add some verts, where they might belong. And so these guys aren't going to be even, so I'll add one there and kind of change up the shape a little. Maybe round that up a little bit like that. Maybe in. So for my top, I'm going to make sure these are nice and straight. And I'm just going to collapse that to an edible poly. So let's just move that over top of his shoulder, shrink it down a little. I'm going to change the pivot so it's in the middle. I'm going to go to my hierarchy here, effect pivot only. I'm just going to click the center on object button. Collapse that back down. So I'm just going to move this over top of his shoulder. Scale it down a little. Alright, something like that. And I'm just going to use the bend modifier. There we go. I'm just going to bend that into a general shape of what I'd like it to be. So let's take a look. Right, this thing's pretty big. Right, maybe should have been a little longer. So I could always go through and just scale it. Don't scale it on the object level, scale it on the element level. Right. I might even add an extra edge in here just to help it with deformations. There we go. Alright, so it's not perfect, but it's a decent start to kind of what we want it to be. So I'm going to move it in there, maybe shrink it down, maybe not have it bent so much, right, and scale it back up or something. Alright, so I'm not really worried about the arm right now. Cool, so we'll do that, and then collapse this guy down to an edible poly. And I'm going to add some edges in here for me to be able to model this guy out a little. Actually, I'm going to just cut right through. There we go. Starting to look okay. some more edges to help me flesh this out a little bit more. And yeah, I created a try here, but we can always clean that up. Alright, so let's take a look at it from all the different angles and see if it's something that I like. He's okay. He's a little big. He's going to be over some cloth, so that's okay. I know he's going to need a bit of room to kind of float up on there. I need to understand what it's going to be made out of as well. If it's metal, obviously I'm not going to be able to like fully conform it to the dude's body because it's just going to have to keep its own shape. And so on. So what I would do is I'm going to just clean this guy up. And then when I'm done cleaning him up and when I'm happy with the shape, I could use a modifier called shell. And that will just kind of extrude all the faces, give it some depth, some thickness. And there we go, we're starting to get some armor for this guy. Some of these edges are kind of crappy still, so definitely go through and adjust all this till I'm happy with it. Right, make sure it flows nicely. Right, that kind of stuff. Make sure it looks good. Right, might do some cool stuff on the side there. I still got to get that little guy up there, so that's going to go over top of this. So maybe I'm going to cut it out a little bit or something like that. So there you go. That's kind of that. We'll go through and build out the rest of this and do the bottom of that. And the way I'm going to do my cloth is the same way I did this sash here, or the strap. Is I'm going to go back to my this guy here. And I'm going to do the same thing as I did before.